The rain hammered against my windshield as I turned the key in the ignition. My hands were steady, steadier than they'd been in years, even though my entire world was crumbling in the rearview mirror. Behind me sat the house Harold, and I built from nothing. Behind me sat a daughter who just called me selfish for refusing to destroy myself to save her. I didn't cry. Not yet. Right now, all I felt was the strange lightness of finally choosing myself. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat. Lydia's name flashed across the screen, her fifth call in 20 minutes. I could already hear her voice in my head, that sharp, entitled tone she'd perfected over the years. Mom, you're being ridiculous. Mom, family doesn't abandon family. Mom, how could you do this to me? But I knew the truth now. She didn't see Margaret Holloway, the woman who'd sewn clothes by lamplight to afford her dance lessons. She saw a bank account, a safety net, a solution to problems she and Evan had created all by themselves. $450,000. That's what she wanted me to hand over. Not ask for. Not borrow. Take. Like it was owed to her simply for being born. I reached over and powered off the phone. The screen went black, and with it, the last thread connecting me to the life I was leaving behind. If you've ever had to choose peace over people, you know that moment when the guilt rushes in like a flood. Your heart screams that you're making a mistake, that you're being cruel, that love means sacrifice no matter the cost. But somewhere deeper, in that quiet place where truth lives, you also know that some sacrifices don't save people. They just teach them that your pain doesn't matter. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. I pressed my foot against the gas pedal and drove into the fog. The headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, and I followed it without looking back. The highway stretched out before me like a promise. I didn't know where I was going yet. Maine, maybe. Somewhere with water and silence and space enough to breathe without expectations crushing my chest. My daughter had asked me earlier if I remembered all the times she'd been there for me. After Dad died, I called you every single day. As if phone calls were currency. As if checking in was the same as caring. What she didn't mention was how those calls always ended, with hints about bills piling up, with gentle reminders that I had money just sitting there gathering dust. Every conversation had been a transaction I was too blind to see. The note I'd left on the kitchen table was short. 3 sentences. Lydia, I love you, but I can't save you anymore. You must learn to save yourself. I wish you peace, not luxury. Mom. She'd find it in the morning, probably after calling everyone we knew, painting me as the villain. Poor Lydia, with her heartless mother who abandoned her. Never mind the $120,000 I'd already loaned them over the years. Money that evaporated with promises to pay me back soon. Soon never came. The dashboard clock read 2:47 a.m. In a few hours, the sun would rise on a world where the old Margaret Holloway no longer existed. That Margaret died tonight, somewhere between "you're so selfish" and the moment I closed the front door for the last time. The gas station appeared like a mirage. I pulled in, stretched my stiff legs, and caught my reflection in the window. 74 years old. Gray hair. Eyes that had seen too much. But there was something else there too. Something I hadn't seen in years. Freedom. I climbed back into the car and pulled onto the highway. The needle pointed north, toward a future I couldn't see, but no longer feared. And my phone, silent, dark, forgotten on the passenger seat, suddenly buzzed back to life. If your heart broke with mine tonight, hit that like button. Because sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Harold used to say that poverty teaches you 2 things: how to work and how to dream. We learned both in that cramped apartment on Foster Street, where the pipes groaned every winter and the neighbors fought loud enough to shake the walls. Our first night there, we had nothing but 2 folding chairs and a blanket spread across the floor. Harold held my hand in the dark and whispered, One day, Maggie, we'll have a house with a garden. You'll see. I believed him because his voice carried something stronger than hope. It carried certainty. He worked construction 12 hours a day, coming home with sawdust in his hair and calluses that never healed. I sewed in our living room, bent over fabric until my back screamed and my fingers bled. Wedding dresses, mostly. Other women's dreams stitched together while mine waited patiently in the corner. But we built something. Slowly. Stitch by stitch, paycheck by paycheck, we climbed. When Lydia was born, Harold cried. Big, gulping sobs that shook his whole body. He held her like she was made of glass and said, "She'll never know what hungry feels like. She'll never wear hand-me-downs or sleep in a room with peeling paint." I thought that was love talking. Now I know it was fear. We gave her everything we never had. Piano lessons. Summer camps. A car for her 16th birthday when Harold and I still shared one beat-up sedan. Every Christmas morning looked like a toy store exploded in our living room. Every report card, even the mediocre ones, earned dinner at her favorite restaurant. She never had to work for anything because we'd already done the working. She never had to wait because we'd done all the waiting. And somewhere in all that giving, we forgot to teach her the most important lesson, that love isn't measured in things, and happiness can't be bought. Harold saw it first. Lydia was 14, complaining that her new phone wasn't the right color. He watched her toss it on the counter like trash and said quietly, "We're raising a taker, Maggie." I defended her. "She's just young. She'll grow out of it." But Harold shook his head. "If we never let her fall, she'll never learn to rise." I should have listened. God, I should have listened. The worst part is that Lydia wasn't cruel as a child. She was bright and funny, the kind of kid who made friends easily and lit up every room. Teachers loved her. Neighbors adored her. She had Harold's smile and my stubbornness, and we thought that combination would carry her anywhere. What we didn't see was that we were building her a cage made of comfort. Every time we rescued her from consequences, we taught her that consequences didn't apply. Every time we solved her problems, we told her that problems would always be someone else's job. By the time she graduated college, she expected the world to bend for her the way we always had. And when it didn't, she learned to make it our fault. Harold died when she was 23. Heart attack. Quick and brutal, the kind that doesn't give you time to say goodbye. One morning he was drinking coffee and reading the paper. By noon he was gone. I remember Lydia crying at the funeral, her face buried in my shoulder. "What are we going to do without him, Mom?" she sobbed. I held her tight and whispered, "We'll be okay. We have each other." But even then, drowning in grief, I noticed something. Her tears felt real, but so did the way she glanced at the program, checking how much life insurance Harold had left behind. Have you ever ignored the warning signs for the ones you love? Comment below. Let's talk about it. The money from Harold's insurance was supposed to be my safety net. $200,000. Enough to keep me comfortable in retirement, to handle emergencies, to live without fear. Harold had worked himself to exhaustion for that policy, adding to it every year, even when money was tight. "Take care of yourself, Maggie," he'd said once, updating the paperwork. "Don't let anyone convince you to give this away. Not even Lydia." I promised him I wouldn't. But promises are easy to make when the person you love is still alive to remind you why they matter. After Harold died, loneliness made me weak. Lydia was all I had left, and she knew it. She called every day at first, just like she'd said. But the calls shifted. Slowly. They went from, "How are you feeling, Mom?" to "I'm struggling with rent this month," to "Could you help us out?" Just this once. Just this once became a pattern. And the pattern became a cage. The day she called to tell me about Evan, I was watering Harold's roses. She was breathless with excitement. "Mom, I met someone. He's amazing. Successful. Ambitious. I think he might be the one." Something in my chest tightened, but I pushed it down. "I can't wait to meet him." When I did, Everything Harold would have hated stared back at me. Evan had expensive clothes and cheap eyes, the kind that measured everything in dollars. He shook my hand too firmly and called me Ma like we were already family. He talked about his ventures and his vision with the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything or never admitted it. Lydia watched him like he'd hung the moon. I watched him like I was watching a storm roll in. After they left, I stood in my kitchen and whispered to Harold's ghost, "You were right. We should have let her fall." That memory burned now as I drove through the darkness. Harold's warning echoing across 15 years. I recalled that warning the night Lydia announced her engagement. Evan beside her, grinning like he'd won a prize. And I realized Harold might have seen what I didn't. Would you have trusted your gut or given them a chance? Let me know in the comments. The restaurant where Lydia introduced me to Evan properly smelled like money, the kind that makes people whisper and check their reflections in polished silverware. She'd chosen it, of course. Lydia always chose places that made statements. Evan arrived late, breezing through the door like punctuality was for people with less important lives. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly groceries and a watch that caught the light every time he gestured. Which was constantly. "Margaret," he said, pulling me into a hug I hadn't offered. "Lydia's told me so much about you. The woman who built an empire from a sewing machine. That's the American dream right there. Empire. As if my small business and paid-off house were kingdoms instead of the result of decades of exhaustion. Harold used to say you can tell everything about a man by how he treats waiters." Evan snapped his fingers for service. He sent back his water because it didn't taste filtered. He talked over the server while ordering, never once making eye contact. Lydia didn't notice. Or didn't care. She just beamed at him like he was performing miracles instead of being rude. "So, Evan," I said, cutting through his monologue about cryptocurrency. "What exactly do you do?" His smile widened. "I'm an entrepreneur, currently developing an app that's going to revolutionize online lending. Think Venmo meets Wall Street. We're in talks with investors right now." Talks meant nothing was solid. Revolutionize meant unproven. Harold would have spotted the red flags immediately. "That sounds ambitious," I said carefully. "Ambitious is what changes the world, Ma." He leaned back, confident. "You didn't build what you built by playing it safe, right?" Except I did. Harold and I built our life on reliability, hard work, and never spending money we didn't have. We built it on safety. But Lydia squeezed his hand and looked at me with pleading eyes. "Don't ruin this, Mom. Just be happy for me." So I swallowed my doubts. I smiled. I toasted their future with champagne I didn't want, because saying what I actually thought meant risking my daughter's love, and I couldn't survive losing her too. The wedding planning started immediately. Lydia wanted everything big, a destination venue, designer dress, live band, flowers imported from Ecuador. The budget climbed higher every week. "Mom, this is the start of our forever," she said, showing me venue photos on her phone. "I don't want to look back and regret not going big. Forever." Such a beautiful word for something so fragile. I contributed $30,000 toward the wedding. Money Harold and I had saved for emergencies. But Lydia's happiness felt like an emergency then, and I convinced myself that helping her celebrate love was what mothers did. Evan contributed promises and debt. The wedding day was beautiful. Objectively beautiful. White roses everywhere, champagne flowing, Lydia glowing in a dress that cost more than my first car. She looked happy. Genuinely happy. And I let myself believe that maybe I'd been wrong about Evan. Maybe love would soften his edges. Maybe marriage would teach him responsibility. I watched them dance under chandeliers I'd helped pay for, and Harold's voice whispered through my memory, "Some people don't change, Maggie. They just find new people to fund their habits." I pushed the thought away and applauded with everyone else. 3 months after the wedding, Lydia called crying. Evan's app had fallen through. The investors backed out. They were drowning in credit card debt from the launch party he'd thrown to impress people who didn't invest anyway. Could you loan us $15,000, Mom? Just until Evan's next venture takes off. I said yes, because that's what I always did. 6 months later, another call. Another crisis. Another loan. This time, $20,000 for Evan's restaurant idea. It's a sure thing, Mom. The location is perfect. The restaurant closed in 8 months. Then came the cryptocurrency investment. Ground floor opportunity, Ma. Evan had said, his eyes bright with delusion. We'll triple our money in 6 months. If you've ever seen through someone's fake charm, double tap this video. Some smiles hide storms. They lost everything in 3 months. Each failure followed the same pattern. Evan's confidence never wavered, even as his schemes collapsed. He'd blame market timing, bad partners, economic conditions, never his own judgment. And Lydia defended him every time, her loyalty to him somehow stronger than her honesty with herself. I started noticing things. The way Evan's tone changed when he talked about money. How his affection toward Lydia warmed noticeably after I'd helped them out. The calculating look in his eyes whenever I mentioned my savings. One evening, I stopped by their apartment unannounced. The door was cracked open, and I heard Evan's voice from the kitchen. Your mom's soft, babe. She'll cave again. She always does. Lydia's response was quieter, harder to hear. But she didn't disagree. I stood frozen in their hallway, hand still raised to knock, realizing I wasn't their mother and mother-in-law. I was their backup plan, their ATM with a pulse. Still, I knocked. I went inside. I pretended I hadn't heard anything. Because admitting the truth meant admitting I'd wasted years and thousands of dollars on people who saw me as a resource, not a person. The lies we tell ourselves are always the most expensive. Harold had been dead 10 years by then, and I missed him with an ache that never dulled. He would have put his foot down. He would have said no the first time Lydia asked for money, and meant it. He would have seen Evan for what he was and protected our daughter from her own bad choices, even if she hated him for it. But Harold was gone. And I was tired. So tired of being strong alone. On the wedding day, as Lydia tossed her bouquet, Evan's smile caught my eye. Cold. Victorious. Like he'd just closed a business deal. And maybe he had. Share this if you've ever realized too late that someone was using you. The pattern started small. A phone call here, a favor there. Lydia's voice always carried the same trembling urgency, the same careful balance between desperation and entitlement. Mom, I hate to ask, but... Except she didn't hate it. Not really. Because she kept asking. Year 1 after the wedding, $12,000 for credit card debt. Evan racked up furnishing their apartment with things they couldn't afford. Leather couches. A 70-inch TV. Art that looked expensive but meant nothing. We need to look successful to become successful, Evan explained, as if appearance could substitute for actual achievement. I wrote the check because Lydia cried and said they'd lose everything if I didn't help. Everything, in this case, meant furniture they'd owned for 3 months. Year 2, $18,000 when Evan's restaurant partnership dissolved. His friend had allegedly stolen from the business account. The story had holes big enough to drive through, but Lydia swore it was true. She needed me to believe her. So I did. Or pretended to. We'll pay you back as soon as the insurance claim goes through, she promised. No claim ever materialized. No money ever returned. Year 3, $25,000 for Evan's cryptocurrency disaster. He'd invested their savings in some digital coin that crashed harder than the Hindenburg. Lydia called from her car, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. We can't make rent, Mom. We're going to be evicted. Please. We'll pay you back with interest. I swear. Swearing meant nothing when they'd already broken every previous promise. But I sent the money anyway because the alternative was imagining my daughter homeless, even though homelessness was a consequence they'd earned. Each time, I told myself it was the last time. Each time I was wrong. The guilt trips evolved. At first, Lydia asked tentatively, apologetically, promising this was temporary. But as the years passed and my resolve weakened, her requests grew bolder. You have all that insurance money just sitting in the bank earning nothing, she'd say, like my financial security was wasteful instead of wise. It's not doing anyone any good. A translation, it's not doing me any good. Evan rarely called directly, but his presence haunted every conversation. Lydia would mention casually that he was stressed, depressed, struggling, that he felt like a failure, that maybe if they just had enough capital to get ahead, everything would turn around. Would you help family no matter how many times they hurt you? Comment yes or no. Your honesty matters. The emotional manipulation was surgical. Lydia knew exactly which wounds to press. After Dad died, I was there for you every single day. As if her phone calls, which always ended with requests for money, were acts of charity instead of investments in future withdrawals. You're all I have left of Dad, she'd whisper. Please don't give up on me. Giving up on her and refusing to enable her weren't the same thing. But she'd blurred that line so thoroughly I couldn't see it anymore. The worst part wasn't the money disappearing. It was watching my daughter transform into someone I didn't recognize. The girl who used to bring me dandelions from the yard became a woman who calculated my net worth over coffee. The child who once apologized for accidentally breaking a plate now demanded hundreds of thousands without apology. Evan had changed her. Or maybe he'd just revealed what Harold and I had created by never teaching her limits. Year 4, $16,000 when Evan's consulting business failed to attract clients. Lydia explained that he needed better marketing materials, a professional website, networking event fees. The money vanished into vague expenses that never produced results. These things take time, Mom, she said when I asked about returns. Success isn't overnight. But failure apparently was. Year 5, $22,000 for legal fees after one of Evan's business partners sued him for breach of contract. The details were murky, the accusations serious. Lydia swore Evan was innocent, that the partner was just bitter and vindictive. Maybe. Or maybe Evan had finally crossed someone who fought back. By year 6, I'd loaned them $120,000. More than half of Harold's life insurance. Money he'd worked himself into an early grave to provide. Money meant to keep me safe in my final years. Gone. Every cent disappeared into Evan's black hole of failed ventures and Lydia's unwillingness to say no to him. I kept a notebook. Dated entries, amounts, promises made. I told myself I was tracking loans that would eventually be repaid. But deep down, I knew I was documenting theft dressed up as family loyalty. The money wasn't even the worst part. It was the erosion of respect. The way Lydia's voice shifted from grateful to expectant. The way she stopped asking and started telling. The way she'd sigh heavily if I hesitated, as if my reluctance to bankrupt myself was a moral failing. One afternoon, I visited their new apartment, funded partly by my money. Lydia was in the bedroom. I heard Evan on the phone in the kitchen, speaking to someone about another business idea. Don't worry about capital, he said, laughing. My mother-in-law's loaded. She'll come through. She always does. Loaded. Like I was rich instead of comfortable. Like I owed him unlimited access to money I'd earned through decades of sacrifice. I stood in their living room, surrounded by furniture and electronics my money had purchased, and felt something inside me crack. Not break. Not yet. Just crack. A fissure that would eventually split me in two. Lydia came out, saw my face, and hugged me. Thanks for always being there, Mom. I don't know what we'd do without you. I hugged her back and said nothing, because saying what I actually thought meant losing her. And losing her meant being completely alone. So I stayed silent. I kept writing checks. I kept pretending that enabling was the same as loving. Until the day she asked for $450,000. One day, I overheard Evan saying, "Your mom's soft. She'll cave again." And Margaret wrote the check anyway. But her hand trembled as she signed it. If you felt used by people you love, share this story. Someone else needs to hear it. Sunday afternoon. The kind that smells like lemon tea and quiet. I was pruning my rose bushes, Harold's roses, the ones he'd planted the year Lydia was born, when my phone rang. Lydia's name flashed across the screen. My stomach dropped before I even answered. After 6 years of crisis calls, my body had learned to recognize disaster before my brain caught up. Mom. Her voice cracked. Not the manipulative crack she'd perfected for smaller requests. This was raw. Terrified. Real. What's wrong? I set down my pruning shears, already running through possibilities. Hospital. Accident. Police. It's Evan. A sob choked her words. Mom, we're in serious trouble. Really serious this time. This time. As if the previous disasters had been dress rehearsals. Tell me what happened. She took a shuddering breath. He's in debt. Bad debt. $450,000. The number hit me like a fist. I actually sat down on the porch steps, legs suddenly unreliable. How is that even possible? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. The lending app. The one he's been developing for 3 years. He took out business loans, maxed out credit lines, borrowed from private investors. He kept saying we were almost there, that we just needed a little more time, a little more capital. But the app failed beta testing. The investors want their money back. The bank's threatening foreclosure. Mom, we could lose our house. Their house. The one they'd bought 2 years ago with a down payment I'd provided. $25,000 I'd called a gift because I knew I'd never see it again. Everything in me wanted to ask why Evan had gambled away nearly $500,000 without telling her. Why she'd let him. Why this was somehow my emergency to solve. But Lydia was crying so hard I could barely understand her, and my maternal instinct overrode my common sense. How long do you have? 30 days. Mom, they're going to take everything. We'll have nothing. We'll be on the street. No, you'll learn to live within your means. You'll downsize. You'll face consequences. But I didn't say that. Have you talked to a bankruptcy attorney? Bankruptcy. She sounded horrified. That would ruin us. Evan would never recover from that. His reputation. His reputation. The man who'd failed at every business venture he'd touched was worried about his reputation. Lydia, I don't have $450,000. A lie. I had $310,000 left from Harold's insurance, plus my savings. But admitting that meant inviting disaster. Yes, you do. Her voice shifted. Harder. More desperate. You still have Dad's life insurance money. I know you do. You barely spend anything, Mom. It's just sitting there. Just sitting there. Like my financial security was hoarding instead of prudence. If your heart broke with hers, share this story. Because some pain deserves to be heard. That money is my retirement, sweetheart. It's all I have left. I can't. The word came out sharp as broken glass. You mean won't? Lydia, that's not fair. Fair. She laughed, bitter and ugly. You want to talk about fair? After everything I'd done for you? After Dad died, who called you every single day, who made sure you weren't alone, who invited you to every holiday, every birthday, every event. Events where I brought gifts I couldn't afford and watched Evan barely acknowledge my presence. Holidays where Lydia asked for loans between dinner and dessert. I appreciate everything you've done, I said carefully, but I can't give you my entire retirement fund. You won't, you mean? Her voice turned vicious. You'd rather sit in that big house alone, hoarding money you don't even need, while your only daughter loses everything. Alone. The word stabbed deeper than she knew. Every lonely dinner, every quiet evening, every holiday I'd spent missing Harold, she was throwing it in my face like a weapon. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about, Mom? Because from where I'm standing, It looks like you care more about money than your own daughter. Dad would be ashamed of you." The line went silent except for her ragged breathing. Bringing Harold into this was her nuclear option, and she'd just deployed it. "Your father," I said slowly, "would have said no the first time you asked. He would have made you face consequences years ago instead of enabling this disaster." "How dare you?" "He told me once, Lydia, when you were 14. He said we were raising a taker, and he was right. We gave you everything, and you learned that everything would always be given." "I can't believe you." Her voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "After all these years, this is who you really are. Selfish. Cold. Heartless." Every insult landed, but none of them changed the math. $450,000 meant bankrupting myself to save them from bankruptcy. It meant sacrificing my security for their irresponsibility. "I love you," I said, "but I can't do this." "Then don't bother calling me again." She hung up. I sat on my porch steps, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to dead air. My roses swayed in the breeze, beautiful and indifferent. Harold's roses, blooming without him, just like I'd somehow learned to live without him. But this felt different. This felt like ending. My tea had gone cold on the railing. I picked it up anyway, wrapped my hands around the cup, and stared at nothing. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange, and I thought about how something so beautiful could happen during something so awful. Lydia would call back. She always did. This was part of the pattern: demand, guilt, anger, silence, then another demand. She'd wait a few days, let me marinate in guilt, then call crying and apologetic, softening me up for the next request. Except this time felt different. This time, the amount was too large, the deadline too urgent, the anger too real. My phone buzzed. A text from Lydia. "I hope you can live with yourself." Another buzz. "Evan says we should have known better than to count on you." Another. "You're choosing money over your daughter. Think about that." I set the phone face down and didn't respond. Responding meant negotiating. Negotiating meant losing. The evening stretched out before me, long and quiet. I thought about Harold, about what he'd say if he could see me now. Would he be proud that I'd finally said no? Or disappointed that I'd enabled them for so long that saying no now felt like abandonment? Margaret hung up mid-sentence, staring at her trembling hands as the tea grew cold beside her. Have you ever had to choose between helping family and saving yourself? Drop a comment below. The clock read 3:17 a.m. I hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lydia's face from 10 years ago, before Evan, before entitlement hardened her features into something unrecognizable. I sat in Harold's chair, the leather one he'd saved 6 months to buy, surrounded by silence, so thick it felt like drowning. The house creaked and settled around me, full of memories that suddenly felt like ghosts. My checkbook sat on the coffee table. One signature. That's all it would take. Empty my accounts, drain my future, save my daughter from consequences she'd earned. The logical part of my brain screamed no. The mother part whispered that maybe losing everything was worth it if it meant keeping Lydia in my life. But there was a third voice. Quieter. Steadier. It sounded like Harold. I got up and walked to our bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled down the box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters Harold had written me during the early days of our marriage, back when he worked out of state and we couldn't afford phone calls. I unfolded one at random. His handwriting sprawled across yellowed paper. "Maggie, I'm sending this week's paycheck minus $20. I know it's less than we need, but I saw a man today get fired for borrowing money he couldn't pay back." It reminded me that debt isn't just numbers. It's chains. Don't ever let anyone put chains on you, not even family. Especially not family. My hands trembled, holding those words. Harold had understood something I'd forgotten. that enabling someone isn't the same as loving them. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone face the truth they've been running from. I opened another letter, this one from the week Lydia was born. Our daughter is perfect, Maggie. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and her mother's stubborn chin. But promise me something. Promise we'll teach her to stand on her own. The world is hard on people who can't. I don't want her to need anyone the way we needed help when we started. I want her to be strong. Would you walk away if it meant finally healing? Subscribe for more stories of quiet justice. We'd failed. We'd given her everything except the ability to stand alone. And now she was falling, and I had to choose between catching her again or letting her finally learn to catch herself. I found another envelope, this one sealed. My name written across the front in Harold's shaky handwriting, the deterioration of his final year visible in the uneven letters. I'd never opened it. Finding it after his funeral had hurt too much, so I tucked it away with the others and tried to forget. My fingers worked the seal loose. Inside, a single page. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. Sorry I'm leaving you to finish what we started. But I need to tell you something I was too much of a coward to say while I was alive. Lydia is breaking your heart. I've watched it happen for years. The way she takes and never gives back. The way she uses guilt like a weapon. You make excuses for her because you love her, and that's what mothers do. But love without boundaries isn't love, Maggie. It's self-destruction. If she comes to you one more time asking for money to fix problems she created, I'm begging you from whatever comes after this. Say no. Let her fall. Let her learn. Because the alternative is watching her drain you dry and hating you for having nothing left to give. You deserve better than that. You deserve peace. Don't let anyone steal it from you. Not even our daughter. I love you forever, Harold. Tears blurred the words. I read them again. Then again. Harold had known. He'd seen the future I was living and tried to warn me from beyond the grave. I looked around our room. The bed we'd shared for 38 years. The dresser he'd built by hand. The window where he used to stand drinking coffee and planning our days. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, preserved like a museum to a life that ended too soon. But I was still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing. I walked back to the living room, picked up my checkbook, and placed it in my purse. Not to write a check, to protect it. Then I pulled out my suitcase from the hall closet. If Harold could see me now, would he understand? Would he approve? Or would he think I was abandoning our daughter in her darkest hour? No. He'd written me the answer. Let her fall. Let her learn. I packed methodically. Clothes. Toiletries. The letters. Photographs of Lydia from before everything went wrong. I left behind everything that didn't matter. The expensive dishes, the furniture, the life I'd been clinging to like a security blanket. At 5 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table and wrote my goodbye note. 3 sentences that said everything and nothing. Lydia, I love you, but I can't save you anymore. You must learn to save yourself. I wish you peace, not luxury. Mom. I propped it against the sugar bowl, where she'd find it. She had a key. She'd come looking for me eventually, probably with Evan trailing behind, ready to escalate the guilt trip. But I wouldn't be here. My hands were steady as I loaded my car. The sun was rising, painting everything soft and pink. The roses Harold planted looked beautiful in that light. I almost stopped to take a cutting, something to remember him by. But Harold wasn't in the roses. He was in the letters I'd packed. In the lessons I'd finally learned. In the strength it took to walk away. I took one last look at the house we'd built from nothing. 55 years of memories pressed into walls and floors. Lydia's height marks on the doorframe. The kitchen where we'd celebrated every birthday. The porch where Harold proposed. All of it was just a building without the people who'd made it a home. And those people were gone now. Harold to death. Lydia to greed. I got in my car, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. No tears. No hesitation. Just the quiet certainty that staying would kill me faster than leaving ever could. At the end of the street, I paused, looked in the rearview mirror one final time. Then Margaret picked up her pen. But instead of writing a check, she wrote the goodbye note. If you've ever had to save yourself by walking away, hit that like button. This one's for the survivors. The highway stretched out like freedom made concrete. I drove north, away from the city where I'd spent my entire life, towards something I couldn't name but desperately needed. My phone rang 16 times in the first hour. Lydia. Then Evan. Then Lydia again. I watched it light up on the passenger seat and felt nothing. Not guilt. Not sadness. Just empty. Around noon, I pulled into a rest stop. My legs were stiff, my back aching from hours in the car. I bought terrible coffee from a vending machine and sat at a picnic table watching families come and go. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, dropped her ice cream. She looked up at her mother with devastated eyes, waiting for the rescue, for someone to buy her another one and make the sadness disappear. Her mother knelt down, wiped the girl's tears, and said gently, "I know you're sad, honey, but we only had enough money for one treat. Sometimes accidents happen and we can't fix them." The girl cried harder for a minute. Then she nodded, sniffled, and asked if they could get ice cream next time. "Absolutely," her mother said. "And next time, you'll hold it with both hands, right?" I watched them walk away, that little girl already learning the lesson I'd failed to teach Lydia. That disappointment doesn't destroy you, and sometimes the answer is no. My phone buzzed. A voicemail. Against my better judgment, I listened. Lydia's voice thick with tears. "Mom, please. I don't understand what's happening. Why won't you answer? We need to talk about this. You can't just abandon me. Mom, please. I'm begging you. Call me back." I deleted it and ordered another terrible coffee. If you've ever chosen peace over chaos, click the like button. This one's for you. By evening, I reached the coast. Maine. I'd never been here before, but something about it called to me. The idea of waves washing everything clean, of starting over where nobody knew my history. I found a small motel near the water. The room smelled like salt air and old carpet, but the window faced the ocean. I stood there watching the sun set over water that stretched forever, and for the first time in years, I took a full breath. That night I slept. Really slept. No nightmares. No phone calls. No guilt gnawing at my chest like a disease. I woke up at dawn to the sound of seagulls and felt younger than I had in decades. The next week blurred together. I explored the coast, ate lobster rolls, and talked to exactly no one about anything important. My phone stayed off. Lydia's texts piled up unread. The world I'd known existed somewhere behind me, but it felt less real with every passing day. I found a cottage for rent, small, weathered, perfect. The landlady was a woman in her 60s named Ruth who asked no questions and expected no explanations. She handed me the keys and said, "Welcome home." Home. Such a strange word for a place I'd never seen before. But my old house had stopped feeling like home years ago. It had become a prison where I served a sentence handed down by people who claimed to love me. This cottage, with its creaky floors and view of the endless ocean, felt more like home in 3 days than my old house had in 3 years. I bought secondhand furniture, set up a small sewing corner, started walking the beach every morning, watching the waves erase yesterday's footprints. 1 month passed. Then 2. My savings would last longer here, where life was simple and needs were small. I volunteered at the local library, helping children learn to read. They reminded me of Lydia before everything went wrong. Curious, innocent, unspoiled. A little boy asked me once why I looked sad sometimes. I told him I was remembering someone I used to know. "Did they die?" he asked with the bluntness of 6-year-olds. "In a way," I said. "Sometimes people change so much they become someone else entirely." He thought about that, then hugged me and went back to his book. 3 months in, I overheard two locals chatting while I shelved books. Did you hear about that couple from Boston? The husband went bankrupt. Something about unpaid loans. My hands froze on the book's spine. Yeah, and the wife's mother? Apparently vanished overnight. Poor woman must have had enough. The other woman snorted. Can't say I blame her. My son-in-law's a piece of work too. Some people just drain you dry. They moved on to other gossip. I stood there holding a children's book about brave little engines, and I smiled. Not from cruelty. Not from satisfaction. Just from the quiet knowledge that I'd finally gotten off tracks that were leading nowhere good. I finished shelving books and walked home along the beach. The sun was setting again, painting everything gold and orange. Waves crashed and retreated, the eternal rhythm of letting go and moving forward. My phone sat in a drawer at the cottage, still powered off. I hadn't checked it in weeks. Whatever messages waited there belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. That night, I sat on my small porch with tea and watched the stars appear. The ocean whispered beneath the sound of wind, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. Margaret received a voicemail from Lydia, crying and begging her to come back. She listened once, then deleted the message and finally exhaled. Sometimes the best revenge is peace. Share this video if you believe that. 6 months into my new life, I had a routine. Wake at dawn. Walk the beach. Volunteer at the library. Cook simple meals. Read before bed. Sleep without nightmares. The simplicity felt revolutionary after decades of chaos disguised as family love. I'd made friends. Not many, but good ones. Ruth, my landlady, who brought me soup when I caught a cold. Tom, who ran the bookstore and saved mysteries he thought I'd like. Sarah, a widow my age who walked the beach at the same time every morning. We never talked about our pasts. We talked about tides and weather and books and the way light changed on water. Surface conversations that somehow went deeper than any tearful phone call I'd ever had with Lydia. One morning, Sarah asked, "You running from something or toward something?" I thought about that. Both, I think. She nodded like that made perfect sense. Me too. Left everything behind 5 years ago. Best decision I ever made. Do you regret it? Every day, she said simply. And not at all. Regret and relief can live in the same heart, you know. I did know. I thought about Lydia constantly. Wondered if she was okay. If she'd lost the house. If Evan had finally left her. If she understood yet why I'd gone. But wondering wasn't the same as rescuing. And caring wasn't the same as enabling. The library became my sanctuary. Children came in after school, full of energy and questions. I helped them find books, taught them to sound out difficult words, listened to their stories about playground drama and lost teeth. One afternoon, a girl named Emma asked me if I had grandchildren. I have a daughter, I said carefully. Does she visit? Not yet. Emma thought about that. My grandma says sometimes people need space to grow. Like plants. Too much water drowns them. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. 7 months in, I finally turned on my phone. The battery was dead, so I had to charge it first. When it powered up, notifications flooded the screen. Voicemails, texts, emails. I didn't read them. Not yet. I just needed to know the device still worked, that I could reconnect with the world if I chose to. The fact that I didn't choose to felt significant. I powered it back off and put it away. 8 months in, Ruth knocked on my door with news. There's a woman asking around town. Says she's looking for someone who moved here from the city. Older woman, lives alone. I thought you should know. My heart stopped. What did you tell her? Nothing. Figured if you wanted to be found, you would have said something by now. Thank you. Ruth squeezed my hand. We protect our own here. Just say the word. Lydia had found me.
Or was trying to.
The knowledge sat heavy in my chest all day. Part of me wanted to run again. Part of me wanted to wait and see what she'd do. But a larger part, the part that had grown stronger these past months, knew that running accomplished nothing. I'd made my choice. Now I had to stand in it. That evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, expecting Lydia. Instead, a man in his 30s stood there, looking uncomfortable. Margaret Holloway? Yes. I'm Detective Phillips. I'm here about your daughter. The world tilted. Is she hurt?
No, ma'am.
But her husband's been arrested for fraud. Multiple counts. Apparently, he'd been running a Ponzi scheme disguised as business investments. Your daughter's been cooperating with investigators. I sagged against the doorframe. Is she in trouble? Not legally. But she's lost everything. The house, the cars, their savings. The court seized it all as part of the investigation. Everything I'd refused to save her from had happened anyway. But this time, I wasn't drowning alongside her. Why are you telling me this? He shifted awkwardly. She asked me to find you. Said she needed to tell you something. I'm not supposed to do this, but he handed me a folded piece of paper. She wrote this. I promised I'd try to deliver it. Sometimes the best revenge is peace. Share this video if you believe that. I took the paper. The detective nodded and left. I stood in my doorway watching the ocean, holding my daughter's words unopened in my hand. The sun was setting again, as it did every evening, indifferent to human drama. Finally, I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was Lydia's, but shakier.
Smaller. Defeated.
Mom, I don't know if you'll even read this. I don't know if I deserve for you to read this. But I need to say it anyway. You were right. About everything. Evan's in jail. The investigators say he stole from nearly 50 people. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the extent of it. But I knew something was wrong, and I ignored it because admitting it meant admitting I'd wasted 12 years on a con artist. We lost the house. I'm staying with a friend, sleeping on her couch, trying to figure out what comes next. I got a job at a community center. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work. The kind Dad would have respected. I think about you every day, about how you begged me to see what I was doing, and I called you selfish, about how you tried to teach me boundaries, and I called it abandonment. I understand now. You didn't leave because you stopped loving me. You left because staying was killing you.
I'm so sorry, Mom.
For everything. For Evan. For the money. For the years I spent treating you like an ATM instead of a person. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to come back. I just needed you to know that I finally understand. I love you. I'm sorry. Lydia. I read it 3 times. Cried through all 3. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the box with Harold's letters. She'd finally learned. The hard way. The only way that ever really teaches. But learning didn't erase the damage. And understanding didn't automatically earn forgiveness. I looked out at the ocean, at the waves that kept coming no matter what, and I whispered, I'm proud of you, sweetheart. But I'm not ready yet. Maybe someday. But not today. Margaret overheard townsfolk gossiping about a bankrupt couple from Boston. Lydia and Evan. She smiled faintly and whispered, Justice doesn't always need witnesses. If you've ever found peace in distance, subscribe. More stories of quiet strength are coming. 1 year and 3 months after I left, I finally wrote back. Not because I'd forgiven everything. Not because the hurt had disappeared. But because Lydia's letter had been sitting in Harold's box for 5 months, and every time I opened it to read his words, I saw hers too. She'd learned.
She'd changed.
And she'd done it without my money, my enabling, or my presence. Maybe that was the whole point. I sat at my small kitchen table with paper and pen, watching the ocean through my window. Starting was the hardest part. What do you say to a daughter who broke your heart but finally understood why? Dear Lydia, I got your letter. The detective found me in Maine, where I've been living quietly for over a year now. I've read your words many times, and each time I feel something different. Anger, sadness, relief,
Pride.
all of it is true at once. I believe you when you say you understand now. I believe you're working hard to rebuild. I'm proud of you for standing on your own, even though it took losing everything to get there. But I need you to understand something too. What you and Evan put me through wasn't just about money.
It was about respect.
About being seen as a person instead of a solution. For years, I gave and gave until there was nothing left, and you took without ever asking if I could afford to give. That kind of damage doesn't heal quickly. I love you. I never stopped loving you. But love and trust are different things, and trust has to be earned back slowly. I'm not ready to come home. I'm not sure I ever will be. This life I've built here is mine, and it's peaceful in ways our relationship never was. But I'm willing to try something small. Write me again. Tell me about your work, about who you're becoming, not about money or problems or what you need from me.
Just about you.
And maybe, over time, we'll find a new way to be mother and daughter. One that doesn't require me to sacrifice myself to prove I love you. I hope you understand. I wish you strength, not comfort. Love, Mom. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's growth. Comment if you've ever found closure. I mailed the letter before I could second-guess myself. Then I went for my morning walk, letting the ocean air clear my head. 3 weeks later, another letter arrived. Lydia wrote about her job at the community center, helping women recover from financial abuse. She wrote about the irony of becoming the person she needed years ago. She wrote about therapy, about facing the parts of herself she'd avoided, about learning to live on a budget and find joy in simple things. She didn't ask for anything, didn't mention Evan except to say the divorce was final, didn't hint about money or reconciliation or coming to visit. She just told me about her life. And it was enough. I wrote back. Then she wrote again. Our letters became a rhythm, once a month, maybe twice. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt something that resembled a relationship. It wasn't what we'd had before. It was better, healthier, built on honesty instead of obligation. 2 years after I left, Lydia asked if she could visit. I almost said no. The cottage was my sanctuary, and letting her in felt risky. But she'd been consistent for months. Respectful. Changed. You can come, I wrote back. For one day. We'll walk on the beach and have lunch. Nothing more yet. She arrived on a Saturday morning in September. I watched from my window as she parked her old sedan. Nothing like the luxury cars Evan used to insist on. She sat in the car for a full minute before getting out, and I recognized that hesitation. She was scared too. When she knocked, I opened the door to a daughter I barely recognized. Thinner, older, tired in her eyes, but stronger in her posture. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. We hugged carefully, like people relearning how to touch without bruising. We walked the beach for hours. Talked about safe things at first, the weather, the town, my volunteer work. Then slowly, deeper things. She told me about the women she counseled, how hearing their stories made her see her own clearly for the first time. I became what I feared most, she said quietly. Dependent. Desperate. Willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to keep a man who wasn't worth keeping. You learned, I said. That's what matters. I learned too late. You learned exactly when you needed to. We stopped walking. She looked at me with Harold's eyes, and I saw my daughter again. Not the entitled woman who demanded my retirement fund. The girl who used to bring me dandelions. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she whispered. Probably not, I agreed. But I'm giving it anyway. Not because you've earned it. Because holding on to anger was poisoning me, and I've had enough poison for one lifetime. She cried then. Big, gulping sobs that shook her whole body. I held her the way I used to when she was small, and the world felt too big. I'm so sorry, Mom. For all of it. I know. And I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward without the weight of the past crushing us both. We had lunch at a small cafe, overlooking the water. Talked about her work, my routines, the books we'd been reading. Normal things. Mother-daughter things that didn't revolve around crisis or money. When it was time for her to leave, she hugged me tighter. Can I come back? In a few months.
Yes.
But Lydia, I'm not moving home.
This is my home now.
If we're going to have a relationship, it'll be on new terms. She nodded. I understand. And, honestly, I'm glad you found peace. You deserve it. I watched her drive away, and I felt something shift. Not complete healing, but the beginning of it. A letter arrived from Lydia, broken and apologetic and sincere. Margaret read it through tears. I finally understand, Lydia wrote. And Margaret picked up her pen and began writing back. Dear Lydia, if forgiveness has ever set you free, share the story. Someone needs to hear it. 8 years have passed since the night I drove away into the fog. I'm 82 now, still living in my cottage by the ocean, still walking the beach every morning, still volunteering at the library where children remind me that innocence exists. Lydia visits 3 or 4 times a year. We walk. We talk. We've learned to be comfortable in the silences between words. She's built a good life, simple, honest, meaningful. She runs the community center now, helping women escape the exact patterns she once lived. Last month, she brought me a framed photo. It shows her speaking at a conference about financial abuse and family manipulation. In the picture, she's confident, clear-eyed, strong. I told your story, she said, setting it on my mantle. Not using names. But I told them about a daughter who took everything from her mother until her mother finally chose herself. And I told them how that choice saved us both. I looked at the photo, at this woman my daughter had become, and felt something I hadn't expected.
Pride.
Pure pride. Your father would be so proud of you, I whispered. He'd be proud of you too, Mom, for finally saying no. We sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over water that stretched forever. The same view I'd watched alone for years, but better now with company I'd earned instead of company that drained me. Do you ever regret leaving? She asked. I thought about that question.
Really thought about it.
Not once, I said finally, because leaving was how we both found our way home. She nodded, understanding in ways she couldn't have 8 years ago. The truth is that justice isn't always loud. It doesn't always arrive in courtrooms or through revenge. Sometimes justice is quiet. It's the sound of waves washing away footprints. It's the peace that comes from finally choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. Sometimes justice is simply walking away and discovering that the person you abandoned wasn't your daughter. It was the version of yourself who believed love meant self-destruction. I learned that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. I learned that you can't save someone who refuses to save themselves. I learned that the people who truly love you won't ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. And I learned that sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is let her daughter fall, trusting that the impact will teach what comfort never could. My daughter learned too. She learned that money doesn't solve problems created by bad choices. That charm without character is just manipulation with a smile. That entitlement destroys faster than poverty ever could. She learned to stand on her own, not because I saved her, but because I finally stopped. These days, we have coffee on my porch and talk about her work. She tells me about the women she helps, the patterns she recognizes, the healing she witnesses. Sometimes she mentions that she wishes she could go back and do things differently. You can't go back, I always tell her, but you can go forward better. And she is. We both are. The ocean keeps rolling in and out, eternal and indifferent. The cottage creaks in the wind. The library fills with children every afternoon. My life is small and quiet and perfect. I think about Harold sometimes, about the letters he left me, about how he knew long before I did that loving someone sometimes means disappointing them. I visit his grave once a year, bring him roses like the ones he planted, and tell him about the woman I've become. I think he'd approve. Not of the pain it took to get here, but of the strength that pain revealed. Last week, a young woman at the library asked me for advice. Her daughter kept asking for money to cover her husband's mistakes. She was tired but guilty, trapped between love and self-preservation. I told her what I wish someone had told me. You can love someone and still say no. You can be a good mother without being an ATM. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give your child is the space to face their own consequences.
She cried.
Then she thanked me. Then she left, and I hoped she'd be braver than I was. Because it took me 74 years to learn that lesson. But once I did, everything changed. Lydia asked me recently if I ever think about what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd emptied my accounts and paid Evan's debt. Every day, I admitted. And every day, I'm grateful I didn't. Why? Because I'd be broke and miserable, and you'd still be married to a con artist, believing that someone would always rescue you from your own choices. We both needed me to leave. We just didn't know it yet. She smiled sadly. It's strange how the worst thing that ever happened to me was also the best thing. That's life, I said. The worst and best are usually the same moment, just viewed from different angles. The sun was setting again, as it always does. Gold and orange and pink painting the sky like a promise that tomorrow comes whether we're ready or not. I'm ready now, for whatever comes next, because I learned the most important lesson of all, that you can survive anything, even losing the people you love most, if you're willing to love yourself more. That's not selfishness. That's survival. And sometimes survival is the most loving thing you can do. For everyone involved. Margaret replies, not once. Because leaving was how we both found our way home. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in the waves. And for Margaret, the sweetest kind of revenge was peace. If Margaret's story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next powerful story. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts and experiences. Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it. Remember, sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing peace. And that's the bravest choice of all. See you in the next one. Retry.